The October sun painted Missouri's cornfields golden when Thomas McKenna raised his axe for the last time that day. His calloused hands trembled not from exertion, but from the crumpled letter in his cotton shirt pocket. At 42 years old, his face marked by Civil War scars told a story he preferred to forget. "Tom?" Sarah's voice echoed from the porch of their modest wooden house. "Supper's on the table." McKenna drove the axe into the stump and walked toward the house, watching his wife dry her hands on her apron. Sarah had aged 10 years in the last 5, since he'd returned from the war. Her brown hair now showed gray strands, and the wrinkles around her eyes told stories of worry and sleepless nights. "Daddy, did you chop enough wood?" asked Emily, 12 years old, running to hug him. "More than enough, little one." Thomas forced a smile, avoiding mention that it might be the last time he'd chop wood on these lands. During their simple supper, bread, beans, and a small piece of bacon, Thomas watched his family. Sarah tried to keep the conversation lively, talking about the chickens laying more eggs. Emily told about her reading lesson at the town school. But Thomas knew both could sense his tension. After supper, when Emily went to bed, Sarah approached him on the porch. "Tom, are you going to tell me what's in that letter, or do I have to tear it from your pocket?" Thomas sighed and handed over the wrinkled paper. Sarah read silently, her expression changing from curiosity to horror. $3,000? She whispered. "Tom, we never borrowed that much money." "I know." His voice came out hoarse. "I never borrowed even $300 from Morrison's bank. But the documents, they have my signature." "Forged?" "Has to be. But who's going to believe me against General Morrison?" Sarah sat in the rocking chair Thomas had made for her in their first year of marriage. "What are we going to do?" "Tomorrow I'm going to town. I'll speak with him personally." "Tom?" Sarah hesitated. "You know he hates you. Every ex-Confederate who managed to keep something, he finds a way to take it." Thomas knew General Ulysses Morrison's reputation well. Hero of the Battle of Gettysburg, he now controlled half the banks and railroads in Missouri. For Morrison, the war hadn't ended, it was just being fought with paper and ink instead of gunpowder and lead. "I have no choice, Sarah. If I don't resolve this, we'll lose everything." That night, Thomas lay awake watching the stars through the bedroom window. Sarah slept restlessly beside him, occasionally murmuring unintelligible words. He thought about the 5 years since returning from war, how he'd fought to rebuild the farm he'd inherited from his father. Every board of the house, every fence post, every row of corn represented sweat and blood. He also remembered a cold winter night 2 years ago, when he found a wounded man near the creek that cut through his property. The man had taken a bullet to the shoulder and was losing a lot of blood. Thomas brought him home, where Sarah treated the wound. The man stayed 3 days recovering in the barn. "My name's Jesse," the stranger had said before leaving. "Jesse James. And I don't forget who helps me." Thomas didn't know at the time that he was saving the life of Missouri's most wanted outlaw. He also didn't imagine that someday he'd need to collect on that debt. Dawn came gray and cold. Thomas dressed in his best clothes, the only ones without patches, and saddled his horse, an old sorrel named Charlie. The trip to Liberty, the county seat, would take 2 hours. "Come home soon," said Sarah, adjusting his crooked tie. "I'll be back," he promised, kissing her forehead. "And we'll resolve this." But as he rode down the dusty road, Thomas McKenna couldn't shake the feeling that he was riding toward his own end. Before we continue, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. We love knowing where our viewers are from. And if you enjoy emotional stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It truly helps us keep going. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Now enjoy the story. The town of Liberty bustled with activity when Thomas arrived that October morning. Wagons loaded with merchandise competed for space with riders, while the sound of hammers echoed from construction of the new railroad station. Progress had come to Missouri, but Thomas felt it was progress that didn't include men like him. The First National Bank of Liberty occupied the most imposing building on Main Street. 3 stories of red brick with white columns at the entrance, designed to impress and intimidate. Thomas tied Charlie to the post out front and straightened his hat before entering. The bank's interior was a demonstration of power. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and employees dressed as if for a funeral. Behind a mahogany desk, a thin man with glasses observed Thomas from head to toe with disdain. "May I help you?" he asked, as if Thomas's presence were a personal offense. "I need to speak with General Morrison. It's about a debt." The clerk laughed softly. "The general doesn't receive just anyone. You can speak with me about your account." "My name is Thomas McKenna. And I said I want to speak with Morrison." The change in the clerk's expression was instantaneous. The name McKenna clearly meant something. "One moment," he murmured, disappearing through a back door. Thomas waited standing in the middle of the bank, feeling the stares of other customers. He recognized some faces, town merchants who probably knew exactly why he was there. In small towns, everyone knew everyone's business. "McKenna?" The voice echoed like thunder. General Ulysses Morrison descended the marble staircase like an apparition. At 50 years old, he maintained the military bearing that had made him famous. Gray hair perfectly combed, impeccable blue uniform even years after the war's end, and blue eyes cold as winter ice. "So the famous Thomas McKenna finally appears in my bank." Morrison stopped on the last step, forcing Thomas to look up. "Took you long enough to pay your debts." "General, there's been a mistake. I never borrowed $3,000. Morrison laughed, a humorless sound that echoed through the bank. All employees and customers stopped their activities to watch the confrontation. "Mistake." Morrison descended the last step and approached Thomas. "The only mistake here was me allowing a rebel trader like you to keep land in loyal American territory." Thomas felt blood rising to his head but kept his voice calm. "General, I'm struggling to support my family. If there's been a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Morrison interrupted, his voice rising. "The misunderstanding was not hanging all you traders when we had the chance." The bank fell completely silent. Thomas could hear his own heart beating. "I have the documents," Morrison continued, removing papers from his coat's inner pocket. "Your signature is here, McKenna. $3,000 at 20% annual interest. You owe $4,200. Thomas looked at the papers. The signature looked like his, but he'd never signed that. "General, I swear by my father's memory that I never signed those documents." "Are you calling a United States Army officer a liar?" "I'm saying there's been a mistake." Morrison moved even closer, his face inches from Thomas's. "You have 72 hours to pay the complete debt or I take your land." "And McKenna?" His voice dropped to a whisper that everyone in the bank could hear. "If you don't pay, I'll personally ensure that you, your wife, and that brat of yours are evicted like the dogs you are." Thomas clenched his fists. For a moment, the old soldier inside him almost resurfaced. But the image of Sarah and Emily made him step back. "I'll get the money," he said through gritted teeth. "Ah, but it's not over." Morrison smiled, a smile that chilled Thomas's blood. "Turn around." "What?" "I said turn around." Thomas, confused, turned his back. He didn't see Morrison's fist coming. The punch hit Thomas between the shoulder blades, making him stagger forward. Before he could recover, Morrison grabbed him by the shirt and shoved him against the marble wall. "This is for what you Confederates did to my men at Antietam," Morrison spat. "And this?" Another punch, this time to the stomach, made Thomas double over in pain. "Is for what I should have done to all of you 10 years ago." Thomas fell to his knees, struggling to breathe. The entire bank watched in mortified silence. Some customers looked away, unable to witness the humiliation. Morrison crouched down and whispered in Thomas's ear, 72 hours, rebel. And if you think about going to the law, remember who the sheriff's friends are." Thomas got up slowly, wiping blood from the corner of his mouth. He walked to the door without looking at anyone, humiliation burning more than physical pain. Outside, he mounted Charlie with difficulty. People on the street watched him with a mixture of pity and embarrassment. Thomas McKenna, war veteran, family man, had been publicly beaten like a common criminal. The ride home was the longest of his life. With each mile, anger grew in his chest. It wasn't just anger about the humiliation but about injustice. About feeling powerless before a system that favored winners and crushed losers. When he arrived home, Sarah was hanging clothes on the line. One look at her husband's bruised face was enough. "Tom, what happened?" "He beat me," he said simply. "In front of the whole town." Sarah dropped the clothes to the ground and ran to embrace him. "My God, Tom." "Sarah," Thomas said, holding his wife's face in his hands. "I need a favor. You need to take Emily and go to your sisters in Kansas City." "What are you going to do?" Thomas looked toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning to set. "I'm going to collect a debt." The Blind Horse Tavern sat on a secondary road 15 miles from Liberty, hidden among century-old oaks. It was the kind of place where men conducted business they preferred to keep away from the law's eyes. Thomas had been there only once, 2 years ago, accompanying a neighbor who sold horses of questionable quality. That October night, with Sarah and Emily on their way to Kansas City, Thomas rode through darkness to the tavern. His face still ached, and humiliation burned in his soul like red-hot iron. He'd spent the entire day thinking, trying to find an alternative, but always reached the same conclusion. A man like Morrison only understood one language. The tavern was busy for a Tuesday. Yellow light leaked through dirty windows, accompanied by loud laughter and the sound of an out-of-tune piano. Thomas tied Charlie to a distant tree and walked to the entrance. The interior was exactly as he remembered, low, dark, and full of smoke. Suspicious-looking men drank cheap whiskey and played cards at wobbly tables. In the back, stairs led to the second floor where other activities took place. Thomas headed to the bar, where a fat man with a grizzled beard cleaned glasses with a rag that had seen better days. "Whiskey," Thomas ordered, placing 2 coins on the counter. The barman served him without questions. Bruised men weren't unusual in that place. "I'm looking for someone," Thomas said quietly. "Everyone's looking for someone." The barman didn't stop cleaning the glass. "Jesse James." The barman stopped. His eyes met Thomas's. "Never heard that name. He was here last week. Brown hair, thin beard, scar on his chin." "Mister, you're describing a lot of men." Thomas placed more money on the counter. "Tell him Thomas McKenna wants to pay a debt." The barman looked at the money, then at Thomas. "Finish your whiskey and wait outside. If someone wants to find you, they'll find you." Thomas drank the shot in one gulp, feeling the liquid burn his throat. He left the tavern and walked to a nearby tree, where he leaned against it smoking his pipe. He didn't have to wait long. "McKenna." The voice came from the darkness. Thomas turned and saw a figure emerging from the shadows. Jesse James seemed to have aged in the 2 years since their last conversation. Deep lines marked his face, and his blue eyes had a hardness that hadn't been there before. "Jesse. Heard you want to pay a debt." Jesse approached, keeping his hands near his holsters. "What kind of debt?" "You said you don't forget who helps you." "That's true." Thomas told him everything. The forged letter, the impossible debt, the humiliation at the bank. Jesse listened in silence, occasionally shaking his head. "Morrison," he murmured when Thomas finished. "That son of a bitch has been stealing land from Confederate veterans for years. The law does nothing because he fills the pockets of every politician in the county. I don't want charity, Jesse. I want justice." Jesse laughed softly. "Justice?" "McKenna, justice died at Appomattox along with the Confederacy. What's left is revenge. Then it's revenge I want." Jesse studied Thomas's face in the weak moonlight. "You know what you're asking? There's no going back after this. He beat me in front of the whole town like I was a dog. Threatened my wife and daughter." Thomas spat on the ground. "There's already no going back for me." Jesse was silent for a long moment. "Morrison will be at the bank tomorrow afternoon. Always stays late on Wednesdays, counting the money he stole during the week. Stays alone, just with one guard. And accidents happen. Especially to men who make many enemies." Thomas felt something cold run down his spine. "You're going to kill him?" "I'm not going to do anything. But if a desperate Confederate veteran decides to take justice into his own hands." Jesse shrugged. "Who am I to judge?" "How?" Jesse smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. "Leave it to me, McKenna. You just need to be sure you want this. Because once it starts, Morrison will be dead by dawn." Thomas thought of Sarah, Emily, the farm his father had built with his own hands. He thought of the humiliation that burned in his soul like acid. "I'm sure." Jesse extended his hand. "Then we're partners." "But McKenna." His expression grew serious. "This will cost blood. And not just his blood." Thomas shook Jesse James's hand, sealing a pact that would change his life forever. "So be it," he said. "Some things are worth more than blood." Jesse disappeared into the darkness as silently as he had appeared, leaving Thomas alone with his thoughts and the promise of vengeance that echoed in Missouri's cold night. Wednesday dawned with overcast skies and air heavy with humidity that announced a storm. Thomas spent the morning putting the farm's last affairs in order, as if preparing for a long journey. He fed the animals, organized tools in the barn, and left detailed instructions for the neighbor who had agreed to care for the property. At noon, he rode to a hill that offered a complete view of Liberty. The town seemed peaceful from a distance, but Thomas knew that at 3 o'clock its tranquility would be shattered forever. Around 2:30, he saw Jesse and 3 other men positioning themselves discreetly around the bank. Even at a distance, Thomas could identify members of the James Younger gang: Frank James, Cole Younger, and Bob Younger. Men hardened by war and outlaw life. At exactly 3 o'clock, Thomas descended the hill and rode toward town. The First National Bank of Liberty was quiet that afternoon. Most customers had already left, leaving only Morrison, his personal guard, and the accountant. Thomas tied Charlie across the street and walked to the entrance. When he pushed the door, he heard the bell ring softly. Morrison was behind the main counter, organizing papers. He looked up and smiled when he saw Thomas. "Ah, McKenna. Come to pay your debt." "I came to resolve our problem," Thomas replied, keeping his hands visible. "I imagine you didn't bring $4,200. Morrison laughed. "Well, then we came here too." The front door exploded inward. Jesse James entered first, followed by Frank. Both had bandanas covering their faces and revolvers in hand. The guard tried to draw his weapon, but Cole Younger appeared through the back door and knocked him down with a pistol butt. "Nobody move," Jesse shouted. "This is a robbery." Morrison went pale. "You don't know who you're dealing with. I'm a general in the United States Army." "Was," Frank James corrected. "Now you're just a thief in uniform." Jesse approached Thomas. "This here is the man you humiliated, Morrison." Morrison looked from Jesse to Thomas, understanding dawning in his eyes. "McKenna, you brought these bandits here?" "I called friends," Thomas replied calmly. Jesse opened the safe using a small amount of dynamite, a technique he'd perfected over the years. When the smoke cleared, it revealed stacks of money and documents. "Frank, take everything that's money," Jesse ordered. Cole Bob watched the street. But Jesse wasn't interested only in money. He found a folder full of loan documents. "McKenna, look at this." Thomas examined the papers. There were dozens of loan contracts, all with signatures that looked forged. Confederate veterans, war widows, small farmers, all indebted beyond their means to Morrison's bank. "How many families did you destroy?" Thomas asked Morrison. The general didn't answer, just stared with hatred at all of them. Jesse found more papers in a locked drawer. "Correspondence with politicians," he announced. "Looks like our general here has been buying favors for years." Thomas approached Morrison. "You ruined the lives of hundreds of people. Entire families lost everything because of your greed." "I am a patriot," Morrison shouted. "You are traitors. Rebels." "The war ended 10 years ago," Thomas said. "But you kept fighting against innocent people." Jesse finished emptying the safe and approached. "It's done, McKenna. We got everything." Thomas looked at Morrison one last time. The proud general was now on his knees, defeated and humiliated. Revenge should have been sweet, but Thomas felt only a strange emptiness. "Let's go," Jesse said. But when they turned to leave, Morrison shouted, "I'll find you. I'll hunt all of you to the ends of the earth." Jesse stopped. Slowly he turned to Morrison. "No," he said simply. "You won't." The gunshot echoed through the bank like thunder. Morrison fell backward, a red stain spreading across his blue shirt. His eyes widened in surprise, then gradually lost focus. Thomas was paralyzed. As much as he hated Morrison, seeing a man die before his eyes was different from imagining revenge. "Jesse," he began. "Some snakes need their heads cut off," Jesse said, holstering his revolver. "Otherwise they keep biting." They left the bank amid chaos. Cole and Bob already had the horses ready. Frank carried bags full of money and documents. The entire town had heard the shot, and people were beginning to gather in the street. "McKenna," Jesse shouted, mounting his horse. "Come with us." Thomas looked back, seeing Morrison's body on the bank floor. Then he looked at Jesse James, the man who had made his revenge possible. "I can't," he said. "I have a family." Jesse nodded with understanding. "Then disappear from here. Go west to California. Change your name. Start over." "And you?" Jesse smiled sadly. "I'll keep being what I always was. But you, McKenna, you can still be a father and husband." The James and Younger brothers rode off at full gallop, disappearing down the dusty road. Thomas mounted Charlie and rode in the opposite direction, toward Kansas City, where Sarah and Emily waited for him. 3 days later, newspapers throughout Missouri reported the robbery of the First National Bank of Liberty and the death of General Ulysses Morrison. The stolen amount was estimated at $15,000. More importantly, documents found in the bank revealed a corruption scheme that destroyed several political careers. Thomas McKenna, Sarah, and Emily took the train to California a week after the robbery. They bought a small farm in the Central Valley using part of the money Jesse had insisted Thomas take. They changed their surname to Mackenzie and never spoke of Missouri again. Years later, when Emily was an adult woman and mother of a family, she asked her father about the scars on his knuckles and the distant look that sometimes appeared in his eyes. "Some stories are better forgotten," Thomas said. "What matters is that we're here together, free." But in California's silent nights, Thomas sometimes thought of Jesse James and wondered if the price of honor had been worth it. The answer was always the same. A man has to be worth something even if it costs everything he has. Morrison had died, but Thomas McKenna, the humiliated farmer from Missouri, had also died in that bank. What remained was just a man trying to live in peace with the choices he made when dignity was worth more than life.